Your life is your life. Don't let it be clubbed into dank submission. There is a light somewhere. There is a way out. If you're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you're going to try, go all the way. There will be derision, punishment, mockery, isolation. But isolation is a gift. All the others are a test of your endurance, of how much you really want to do it. And you'll do it despite rejection and the worst odds. And it will be better than everything else you can imagine. If you're going to try, go all the way. There is no other feeling like it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Go all the way. Welcome to Rebellion. This was the opening, my friends.
Hey, we're not Rebellion.
This is the opening, my friends, of Rebellion on Impact Plus, Night 1. It aired last Tuesday on Access TV and is now available on Impact Plus. And they are words from a poem by Charles Bukowski. They're not all the words. It's not even every word in there is actually from his poem. But it's a cool poem. I'm glad they used that. I just wish that the pay-per-view would actually fit those words.
Well, to me, that was the highlight of the entire program.
Wow, that's saying something right there.
I mean, there were a few little.
Before we get too far, I'm going to say, welcome to Kingdom of Honor here on LP Radio and also on YouTube. I'm your host, Sandman Shane Sabunia. My good buddy Jeff is talking in the other end. And Jeff, before you get to what you're going to say, I do want to say that I also want to bring up the fact that, for the last year and a half or so, I know you've been thinking to yourself a question. And you haven't always said it on the show. You've internalized it a lot. But now you finally have your answer. And you're going to have it going forward on Impact. I'm very happy for you. That question, of course, was, where is Crazy Steve and why hasn't he been signed to a major contract?
I'm going to take that back. There was one other really a highlight of Rebellion. And honestly, that was Madison Rain's commentary. I thought she was brilliant all night long. She was great in her little barbs against her husband. She was kind of spot on in pretty much everything that she did. I absolutely loved her commentary.
Yeah, it's weird because, you and I both kind of watched the Impacts leading up to get caught up on what was going on. And for the first couple of nights that they were together, she played it completely straight.
Yep.
And the last Impact before Rebellion and then Rebellion itself, she just tore into Josh mercilessly.
Yeah, she just went straight up heel and just tore into Josh and was like vicious. There wasn't even any she didn't pull any punches. Like, she just went all out on him. And my favorite was the wine tasting.
I was about to say that was great. The wine tasting was great, and as great as it is to have Don Callis always comment on, anytime Madison Rain was wrestling or out there, he would comment on Josh's love life and how he'd never be able to get a woman, and then for Madison to play off it the entire time as well, we're not going to Impact Plus and chill Josh. It's never going to happen. Never.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. That one and the wine tasting. She had some really good digs on him that made me very, very happy. I'm not gonna lie.
And then when she said that she thinks that she muted him on Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah. She was...
not banned him or deleted him, but just muted him. So he can say all he wants to her. She's never gonna see it.
She was definitely out of these matches. I thought the Rascals did well. I actually didn't hate that opening match, but whenever Jake Christ is in a match, it's hard to. I thought Tommy.
What?
Huh?
Whenever what's in a match?
Jake Christ.
Oh, okay. No, I actually, we really have been hard on Crazy Steve the last couple of years because he was so terrible in that match against Vampiro.
But was he terrible, or was it Vampiro that was just that? Because Vampiro was blown up by the time he walked down to the ring.
Well, I was going to say, then also, he was part of that surprise tag team at the NWA 70th anniversary special that we just kind of totally blasted as well. But really, Crazy Steve is a very talented performer in the ring.
Yeah, I mean he did give a compelling promo after the commercial break and everything too. So it wasn't he's not horrible. He was actually probably next to Jay Chris, probably the most crisp guy in this match. And I'm not really downplaying Crazy Steve. When I'm bad mouthing the worst match of all time, it's not because Crazy Steve did what he could with what he had to work with. But when your opponent can't even breathe after he walks 20 feet to the ring, that's an issue. And that's what Crazy Steve had to deal with Vampiro, whatever he's called.
Yeah, close enough. Yeah. But still, he was still half of one of the worst maybe the worst match in the history of pro wrestling. So.
That is true. And unfortunately, that is unforgivable. But I'm willing to overlook it and just have it as an asterisk on his career if he continues. Because I felt like, I mean, his promo skills aren't that bad, and he does have a lot of charisma. I've never really been into those kind of, it's one of the few things like about Darby Allin I'm not a fan of. I've never really been into the face painted, just a face paint type thing. It was Sting, it was that became part of him, and then it just seems like everybody's getting weirder and weirder with it, but now they're doing more gothic things with it, so it's, I don't know, I'm not a fan of it, but, he gave a pretty compelling promo. He was actually really crisp in the ring. He seemed to be pretty much carrying the match whenever Jay Christ wasn't in there. I felt like he did a good job, so I'm not going to rag on him too much, and I might actually forgive him because I think his partner was more to blame than him for that horrible display.
Oh, definitely he was. Yeah, I mean, Vampiro should not have been anywhere near a wrestling ring that night. So.
No.
Not even on commentary, and he's a good commentator too. So.
I love him on Lucha Underground.
But yeah, the thing with this match is, you look at it and you're like, and I think a lot of people would look at this and go, Rhino, Tommy Dreamer, and Crazy Steve, what a team. I thought it was weird that Crazy Steve was the partner of Rhino and Dreamer, just because you would have expected one of the hardcore legends to be their partner. Like, I'm glad it wasn't like Sandman, but you would have expected it to be like Sandman or Sabu. But really, there's nobody in this match that cannot go. I love all the guys in OPE. Crazy Steve, like I just said, is an actual really good wrestler. Rhino's always been great. Dreamer's been great for a long time. So I mean, really, there's no reason this match shouldn't have been good, and it was good.
See, now when I look
not great, but it was good.
When I look at the ECW originals and the ones that are still wrestling, Tommy Dreamer and Rhino are the only two that I'm not upset about. Like the rest of them, I just wish they'd go away. But I don't mind watching Rhino. I think Rhino is still... the fact that Rhino never got more run with anything than he did is just mind-blowing to me. And Tommy Dreamer, as much as I criticize him at times because I think it gets a little much with all of his hardcore antics in every single match, even when they're not hardcore matches, I still respect the guy, and he does put on a hell of a show. He's a hell of a worker. And he's never been a guy that's afraid to poke fun at himself, like his whole assisted kip-up thing that he did in this match. He's always out there having a good time. You can tell it in his matches, and he's one of the best of all time.
He is, and thanks for bringing that up, because that actually is something I wanted to talk about. Is that would have been a great spot to do if there was actually a crowd.
Right.
I thought it was absolutely lame doing it with no crowd out there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a spot where the crowd, egging him on would have worked really well and would have been a great moment. But when there's no crowd out there to do that, it just fell completely flat to me.
But at least it wasn't a ladder match with two people standing on top of the ladder looking around to the crowd to find out what happened.
Very true. The other thing I want to say about what you said about the old time ECW guys, there's one more guy that still wrestles out there that I still enjoy the hell out of when I see him, and that's Guido Maritato. But I mean, I definitely agree with you that Johnny
I guess I
Swinger,
don't see him
Rob
often
Van
enough.
Dam, Sabu, I don't want him. I don't want them around
I
anymore.
mean, Johnny Swinger is okay,
No, he's not.
just not in a wrestling ring. I think he'd make a hell of a manager with his gimmick.
Oh my God, he annoys the
Try,
fuck out of me.
I do have some intrigue in his teaming up with Disco. But ultimately, I don't want him anywhere near a ring. I'm so disgusted with this Rob Van Dam character that he's doing. Oh, great, we get to see a couple of hot chicks with him. That's about the extent of what I like about his entire character.
Yeah, but you haven't seen him. I don't think you've actually seen him with Joseph Ryan yet.
Oh, nope, I haven't seen any of that.
So that's actually kind of a fun gimmick. I just think that RVD and Katie haven't been around because of the COVID stuff.
Well, I mean, I wasn't a big fan of his. I think the fact that he talked so much about being an innovator. And I mean, yes, okay, a couple of his moves, especially like the coast to coast, and that stuff got duplicated. But so much of his stuff was done with a chair that it can't be duplicated, and makes sense in 99.9% of matches. So he was never really, ripped off like he tries to say. I mean, we talked about it before. You want to talk about guys that were innovators? You got Shane Helms. You got the guy who played Mortis. I can't think of his name now.
We don't need to retread all that, Joe. Yeah. I'm just saying that I think.
Please,
I think
can we retread it? Can we retread it so I can get my mind off RVD?
No. There's no reason to.
I want to. So. I want to.
You don't always get what you want.
I never get what I want.
I would say that about this. The other thing I'd say about this match is that OVE lost yet again. They haven't won a match in like 3 months. So I'm hoping that with this loss and then finding what happened with Sami Callihan at the end of the night, they can regroup and they can actually start winning some matches again, because it's kind of getting old that with him being such a losing streak.
Yeah, I mean, it was okay when Jay Chris was like the X Division champion, but now that he doesn't have a title and they keep losing, they're getting close to being buried.
Yeah, and that's why I'm hoping this is going somewhere that it's just they were losing because Sammy wasn't around. Now that he's back, but he's kind of rejected them, that they kind of regroup and start taking over again.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
I don't understand. I did not say, "Hey Google, what the hell just happened?"
I mean, not like we really need to go through with anything in order, but since you brought up Sammy, this match was that Ken Shamrock Sammy Callihan match. First of all, it was only 10 minutes long. It was 10 minutes too long. I mean, there was 44 seconds of it were in the ring, and then they fought backstage, and then all of a sudden it skipped to a pre-recorded segment, which was horribly done. And the whole pre-recorded segment was just a cross between the Boneyard match and Edge and Christian's, Edge and Randy Orton's brawl, or their, street fight or whatever they had. The only thing that would have made it almost identical would have been if they got on top of that truck out at the end.
Yeah, just like Gargano and Ciampa did as well.
Right. And the thing with Sammy, and I mean, you talked about him rejecting OVE. Did he really? Because he is clearly not a face. That was clearly not a face turn for him. And he's treated everybody in OVE like that before. So it's not surprising he'll probably run it off as some tough love type thing and just continue on with the way they've been.
He's never treated them that way before, where he knocks them all out with a blackjack or a baseball bat or whatever the hell it was at the end.
No, but he was in the middle of a battle, so it kind of made a little more sense that he got a little more hot-headed, but he's always been a little rough on them.
A little, but not to that extreme. So yeah, I think definitely OVE is over at this point, or at the very least, they're going to have to prove themselves to him to get him back as their leader. But you know what? Everything you said was true, and I would have been perfectly fine with it all happening if the right guy had won that match.
Right.
But I mean, you can't have this. You can't have, the show start with a poem about going all the way, seeing everything through, and then having the guy that, started the feud in the main event fucking pass out to lose it.
And pass out to an ankle lock. When was the
Yeah.
last time anybody passed out to an ankle lock after 35 seconds of being in the hole? You
Probably a
built,
Kurt Angle match at some point, but I get your point.
you built Sammy up to this unstoppable force on his way to win the title. You punk him out to Tessa Blanchard, one of the worst, arguably one of the worst displays of Sammy's life.
The worst match of the year to this point.
I still will say that Sammy's performance in that is what brought that down so badly because he was so over the top as a heel. But Sammy. We know he's a hell of a worker. We know what he was getting into with this match with 55-year-old Ken Shamrock. It's not like they're going to go out there and have a 5-star classic. But with the way this went, 10 minutes, this match should have been stand up, blood and guts, beat down. There's nobody to stop them because it's just the referee. And they should have just fought and fought and fought until somebody finally passed out. Not a shitty little pass out like that because of an ankle lock 10 minutes into a match.
And what is the value of Ken Shamrock to that promotion if he's not going to lose a goddamn match?
Right, if he's not going to put people over. He's still a big name.
Yeah.
He's still one of the baddest men on the planet, even at, 52 or 54, something like that. This was
you said 55, so we'll just go with that. I have no idea.
But, he could be 70 for all I know, but I know he's in his 50s.
His first match back, he barely lost to Moose by absolute cheating.
Mm-hmm.
He still ended up looking better than Moose in that match. His second, then his next pay-per-view match, he beats Madman Fulton, and now his third one, he beats goddamn Sami Callihan. So if he's not there to put people over, what the fuck is he there for? I mean, and you know what? I am very happy for Ken Shamrock that he's going to be in the TNA Hall of Fame this year. For the first time ever, the TNA Hall of Fame will actually fucking mean something, because in my mind, if AJ Styles or Ken Shamrock was not your first inductee into that thing, you should never have existed in the first place. Well, so finally, one of those two guys is finally going to be fucking inducted, and the Hall of Fame will actually matter. But I mean, Shamrock in this day, no, don't even. Yeah. Ken Shamrock in this day and goddamn age should not be beating a main eventer in a match.
At the time that the TNA Hall of Fame was made up, wasn't AJ still under contract with them?
Yes, he was.
Oh, but they did put Kurt Angle in as the first ballot. Well, he was still under contract and wrestling with them, but at least it was his last year with the company.
Everybody else they put in there has been had a wrestling match for them that same year.
Oh, really?
I think so.
I guess I haven't paid that close of attention to their Hall of Fame because it's really pointless. But
I think the last one that went in was Abyss last year, right? And he had matches last year.
Well, he had his the standard Hall of Fame inductee match where they come back and have that one match right on their induction night or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, are you the list of guys that went in there, and AJ Styles is never going to be in there now, unless it's like years after he's retired. I mean, they got fucking Sting, Kurt Angle, Gail Kim. I think Jarrett's in there. Team 3D's in there. I mean, are you fucking kidding me?
See, and I can't.
It took them until last goddamn year to put in a TNA original in there.
Who'd they put in last year?
Abyss.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. The fact that AJ's not in there yet is mind blowing.
He should have been the first inductee if it wasn't Ken Shamrock. I will always have that opinion.
Yeah, considering that they did induct Kurt Angle while he was still their heavyweight champion. They pretty much forewent all the rules that you've got to be retired and this long out of it and whatever as soon as they inducted Kurt Angle. So why not put in the best product you've ever produced? And the fact that he's still not in, this many years later is just embarrassing.
Right. I mean, and to me, it just shows the disrespect that TNA always had for AJ Styles.
Yeah, it's not like, I mean, especially now that they're not owned by Dixie anymore. Now that they're owned by Impact or Anthem, Anthem companies or whatever they're called, um, it doesn't have the same ties anymore. So at this point, you would think they would want to honor the truly greats of their company to build up. Could you imagine what that would do for buy rates? How many people out there do you think that are just WWE fans that don't realize they can go back and watch some of this greatness that AJ Styles did on the Impact Plus match app?
Well, he's never going to be inducted as long as he's a member of the WWE roster, though.
Yeah, I know. I understand that. But I'm just saying, it's like, could you, with a company, an upstart company like this, when there's already a precedence that there's really no rules on who's getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, it's stupid for them not to capitalize on the best wrestler. They could have done it 3 years ago when he was considered the best wrestler on the planet.
Yeah. Well, so here's who is currently a member of the TNA Hall of Fame, and they didn't induct anybody in 2014, 2017, or actually 2019. So this was actually in 18. So Sting and Kurt Angle and Jeff Jarrett were the first 3 inductees. All 3 guys who had their best success in other companies. Jarrett's, I guess, arguable, but I would say
Kurt Angle's arguable too because he spent the majority of his career with TNA.
But he was well known and like a 5-time, 6-time WWF champion.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever, going into TNA.
Yeah, that's true.
Earl Hebner, who obviously had his most success in the WWE. Gail Kim, Abyss, and Ken Shamrock. So I guess Gail Kim technically is the first TNA original.
Was she? I guess she was an original, wasn't she? Because she was on those 2002 Asylum stuff, and then she went to WWF, and then went back to TNA, made a name for herself in TNA, then went back to WWE, lasted for like 3 weeks, and then was back in TNA again.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, to me, I just think that it's ridiculous that the first 3 people were Sting, Kurt Angle, and Jeff Jarrett. It should have been AJ Styles and then Ken Shamrock, or vice versa. Jarrett's fine, but I think Sting being inducted there is just completely fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, considering he pretty much lived off of his WCW run, the entire TNA run, right down to keeping the same character for the first 8 years of existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, they didn't induct anybody in 2014. That easily could have been the year they inducted AJ Styles as well, to at least get him in there.
I understand why they didn't, though. That was Dixie Carter, and he had just left that year, so... Or no, he had left the year before, didn't he? Because he joined... When did he join WWE? Was it 16 or 14?
16.
Okay, so he just left in 14 then.
He left at the end of 14, though. They were still trying to negotiate his contract during Bound for Glory, which is when they typically have their Hall of Fame ceremony.
Which would have been a good time to put him in the Hall of Fame.
You think?
Hey, you can't leave now. We just put you in our Hall of Fame.
That might have been a good incentive to keep him there, don't you think?
You think? Yeah, possibly. Could you imagine if he had been a lifer in TNA? If he was still wrestling for Impact and he'd never left TNA to go to Japan and WWE, would the whole world be talking about him in the light that they are?
The whole world wouldn't be. You and I still would be, but not the whole world.
Or would he, have ended up being kind of like like a Sting, to be honest. I mean, Sting never wrestled for the WWE. It's not like, I guess during the WCW time, that's kind of an unfair comparison because of how the heights that got to, but I can't think of another wrestler out there that would be in that kind of light, being considered one of the greatest to ever step in a ring, but not have the fanfare that he does.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sadly, it's still, even in this day and age of all the streaming services and everything you can watch, that it's still, basically taken for granted. You have to have had a good run in the WWE to be an all-time great.
Yeah, which is kind of sad. which is really kind of sad. And when you talk about that, it makes me wonder how many, because we just don't physically have the time to watch stuff like, I can't remember that guy's name, but the guy that went against Osprey not too long ago.
Dowie James.
Yeah, I mean, we can't watch a Dowie James match, but how good is he? Is he one of those guys that's as great as AJ Styles was in a company that we've never really heard of?
Yeah, I mean, and is he? And are there guys out there that are that great, but they don't want to leave their home countries?
Like Walter was for so many years.
Exactly. I mean, how great is David Starr? And probably 95% of wrestling fans don't even know who the hell he is.
That's a good comparison. Yeah, David Starr is probably the best unsigned wrestler right now.
Yep, exactly. All right, so where do you want to go from here? Do we have to? I don't think we even have to talk about Kylie Ray versus Kira Hogan, do we?
I don't know that I care about the rest of these matches. I mean, to be honest,
well, you've got to have some opinion of Ace Austin versus Willie Mack.
It sucked. It's terrible. I hate Willie Mack with a passion. I hate his character. I hate his aw shucks attitude, while trying to be a badass at the same time. And then the fact that he went over Ace Austin pisses me off even more. I will say they did put on a pretty decent match. Ace Austin really.
It was to me the match of the night.
Yeah, because the rest of it was crap. That's like saying you found a peanut in a turd. It's not that exciting, but it wasn't.
Whoa, wait! Who goes looking through turds for anything, much less a peanut?
Well, sometimes you get a little hungry.
Okay.
Ace
Baker's really satisfied.
Ace Austin's performance was pretty good. I'll give him that, but it was what we expect from him. Willie Mack's attitude and his whole character just annoys me so bad that I can't watch when he's on the screen. I can't listen to his promos. I can't. He's terrible to me. And this was technically really the only match that had any time to breathe. It was 13 minutes long.
Yeah, I actually thought it was a very solid match, and I didn't see the end coming. I really thought something was going to happen where Ace would hold on to the title, but he did have a good run with it. He held the title for a good 6 months. So
what would have been a great way to end this match, something I've been screaming for the last year and we never seem to get. This would have been a great spot for a Rich Swann heel turn that they've been teasing for 8 months.
It would have been, but if he had done it to cost Willie Mack the championship, then we would have been screaming at it the same. We should be screaming at it the same way we screamed at Johnny Gargano costing Ciampa the match.
Yeah, but at least this we would have seen coming.
Yeah, but it still would make no sense. I mean, it would have made a lot more sense for Swann to attack him after the match, but that didn't happen either.
Right.
To me, I mean, Rich Swann being there was completely pointless.
Well, I think that. Well, yeah, because he didn't come to ringside, did he?
No, after the match was over, he stood on the apron and cheered Mack as Mack walked back.
Because that would have been, and yeah, okay, even if Willie Mack had won, you're right. And I thought that too. Willie Mack should have won the match, and then Rich Swann should have turned on him.
Yep.
And they could have, it's something they've been teasing for 8 months. And it would have been a perfect professional jealousy moment for it to happen. Instead, we got another lame promo with Johnny Swinger. And them sneaking out the back door to party.
You just got done saying how great Johnny Swinger is on the mic, and now you're saying he does lame promos. Make up your fucking mind.
I'm not saying. I guess I worded that wrong. I think I think his character would make for a great manager. I'm not saying he's an all-time great talker, but I think his character would make for a fun manager for somebody. But it was another same old Willie Mack, Rich Swann promo that we've seen for the last 8 months, and then you throw in Johnny Swinger with his crazy thinks he's Willie Mack's best friend promo again. I would rather seen Rich Swann turn on Willie Mack at that point.
Yeah, I do not understand why Johnny Swinger has a job.
And then
I hate saying that, and that's especially this time of year. I mean, you really don't want to wish anybody not to, to be unemployed. But at the same time, like, I just don't understand the appeal of Johnny Swinger to anybody, and much less why he was hired in the spot that he was hired in.
You know what it reminds me of? Remember when
Nepotism?
Hogan and Bischoff went to TNA and they started hiring all their friends?
Yes.
Don Callis pretty much owns TNA now, or is not one of the owners, but
He's the president, yeah.
he's the president, and all of a sudden, all of his ECW friends have jobs again.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for that, just because they're guys know what they can do, what they can trust. But at the same time, I just think there's other guys you could bring in that would do a better job than Swinger does.
Like half the WWE roster that just got fired.
Half is probably pushing it.
All right, they could have a spot for quite a few of them. Though.
Yeah.
Especially a guy like EC3 and Drake Maverick.
Yeah, but is Drake Maverick really fired?
I don't care, to be honest with you.
The only other thing about this show I kind of want to mention is I'm glad that the Rascals won their match, which was a bit of a course correction on that Fatal 4-Way they had like just a week before, where fucking TJP and Fallah Bahh won instead of the Rascals. So I'm glad the Rascals got a victory here to kind of course correct that and hopefully put them back in the driver's seat for a shot at those tag titles again.
The only thing I have to say about this match, other than the fact that Rascals were the highlight of the match. They were fun to watch.
Duh.
They were fun to watch. It's nice to see them as a tag team. It's weird seeing Dez and not Trey, because forever it was Trey and Wentz, and now it's Dez and Wentz while Trey's doing his solo career. But it was nice. It was nice to see them. But the only thing I can really remember about this match that really stuck out to me is the opening scene when AC Romero, Larry D, and Fallah Bahh, all three were standing on the same side of the ring. And the only thing I could think in my head is, how the fuck much support do they have on that ring? I'm serious. That was like 1,000 pounds of man standing on that side of the ring.
Yeah.
How did it not crumble?
No, I mean, I don't hate EC Romero and Larry D as much as a team as I did, before. So I mean, I guess they're growing on me a little bit, but I really think Larry D has a stupid fucking name.
I don't hate AC Romero and Larry D as a team as much as I hated them individually, but I still don't like either one of them.
Yeah, I know you've hated it. I think AC Romero would work wonderful as a Vader type, heel. But but they haven't done that yet with him.
They did it in MLW. They've done it in Impact. I'm just sick and tired of hearing about how athletic AC Romero is, and then watch him run in slow motion while they're saying he's such a superior athlete.
Well, you have to be some kind of an athlete to be able to move at all with the size of that guy.
Yeah, you're 400 and some odd pounds, and you can actually walk, or kind of somewhat semi-jog.
And do cartwheels, don't forget that.
All I know is that we get that every match about the athlete that AC Romero is, and then you watch him do a drop kick where he gets like a quarter-inch of hang time.
It's interesting, I kind of was watching, these impacts and leading up to this and thinking, the stuff that they're saying is going to happen on Rebellion, they're really not building up to very well. And now, they never built to a tag title match at all. They built to a women's, they didn't really build to a women's title match at all, even though they said there was going to be one. I mean, it wasn't until the last 5 minutes of the main event of the Impact before that there was any interaction between the champion and the challenger for weeks. Jordynne Grace and Taya Valkyrie, and it just felt like they were kind of mailing in a pay-per-view, and I realized that they the last 3 weeks they kind of knew that they didn't have all their talent available, but at the same time Valkyrie was there, Grace was there, and there was all the tag teams there. So I mean, why couldn't they have built to something that would have been meaningful? And now it turns out that it wouldn't have mattered because the stuff they were building towards isn't happening anyway for the most part.
Well, the North are in Canada. They're not there, are they?
Now they are. Yep. And I'm guessing that's where Tyler Valkyrie is as well, because they're not, that match isn't taking place either.
Because I know Eddie Edwards stayed home for personal reasons, and Taya went to Mexico before they shut down Mexico.
Tessa.
Or Tessa, yeah, went to Mexico before they shut down Mexico, and then the North are, they were up in Canada when the stay-at-home order came. So, I mean, it's kind of like double or nothing for AEW. It's hard to see where it's going to go because we don't know who's going to be available.
But at least with AEW, they got some weeks to build up to it, and they've already announced they're going to be doing some live event, or not live events, but I mean they're going to have they're going to do at least 1 or 2 live Dynamites heading into Bound for Glory or Double or Nothing.
And I saw the Twitter sphere just go ape about that, and all I wanted to say is about that, they're not opening it up to live audiences. It's not.
No, they're just going live.
Right.
I think everybody just kind of assumed that what that meant, and I was like, why are you guys going so nuts about this?
I mean, I was reading one Twitter thread where people were swearing off AEW forever, and I'm sitting here thinking, they record 3 episodes a time. Why can't one of those episodes be live?
Right, that's exactly what I said.
It made no sense to me that people were going that ape about something that really wasn't that important. But, whatever.
Right, and they have to be headquartered in a state that apparently has decided that pro wrestling is an essential business. So, as long as they do it without fans, so I mean, I think they really. What's that?
I thought they had to do it in Georgia.
They might be doing it in Georgia. I mean, that was originally they were doing it in Georgia at QT Marshall's facility. So I mean, possibly, but they're also headquartered in Jacksonville, and Florida and Jacksonville they're able to run it too. So either way, I mean, they're still the point remains the same, that they can do a live show and then tape a couple 2 or 3 episodes after that, and then they can do Double or Nothing live. So it's not that big of a deal.
Or they could tape a couple episodes before it. I would probably make more sense. Because otherwise, you tape a couple episodes after, you're going to have these guys wrestling till 4 in the morning. But then again, too, if I could work for 8 hours and then not work for 3 months, I think I'd do that too.
Well, here's why I wouldn't do it that way. Because what if you set up something on one of the taped ones and now when you do the live special and somebody like breaks their leg or they get hurt in some other way, I just don't think it makes sense to do the tape stuff on the same show
true.
After the live.
So. That's true. That makes sense. Because you start to run into things like Ring of Honor. That one of the problems Ring of Honor has is that they've got live events and tape shows, and then it takes you 3-4 weeks of build up on the tape show before you finally get to whatever happened on the live event, and the live event screwed up everything.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, that's why I wouldn't do it that way. I mean, they could certainly do they could do the. I'm not saying they have to do it at midnight or something, but they could always come back the next day and do some tapings.
So I don't know. I can't even comment. I mean, other than Kylie Ray, her gimmick is awful. She's really good. She's really good in the ring, but her gimmick is so bad.
I cannot stand Kylie Ray. The other thing I was going to say, though, is that about the stuff we were just talking about is I would hate for Tessa Blanchard to lose the World Championship because she's not wrestling here, and then have the Twitterverse explode about that against Impact. At the same time, Tessa Blanchard really fucking needs to lose that championship.
Yeah, I don't know what they're planning on doing with it. I guess we'll find out this weekend, but I can't imagine that they're going to just give the belt to Michael Elgin. But at the same time, Tessa can't defend her title, but then too, she can't defend her title because of it's not her fault she can't. So there's.
Well, she didn't have to go to Mexico.
No, she didn't, but she didn't realize.
when Michael Hogan said that, I was like, you're fucking right. She didn't have to go to Mexico.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree, but especially during a worldwide pandemic, she should have thought a little bit ahead. But I also can't blame her for going before they shut the borders. She didn't realize they were going to shut the borders.
No, but I have felt that the problem with Tessa Blanchard is, and I know that Ryan's going to disagree with us. And there's probably plenty out there that are still big fans of Tessa Blanchard, but I feel like she's been rushed into the spot too quickly, and her storyline like peaked way too soon. And she's been pretty much a lame duck as champion as far as I'm concerned.
I'm a big fan of Tessa Blanchard. A huge
I know.
fan. I think she's one of the greatest female wrestlers ever. But the problem is, she'll never go down that way because she was really rushed into wrestling against men before she was really in a position to. And then not just rushed into wrestling against men, maybe something like they did with China in the 90s would have worked better, where she gets a one-off match against a man, and then 6 months later maybe gets another one-off match against a man, then maybe a year later gets a title shot for the X Division title. Instead, they went, hey, you're wrestling against a man this weekend, and within 6 months she's the top title holder in the company.
Yep.
And now she can never go back to wrestling against women.
And I was a big fan of Tessa Blanchard, and I could be again, but I just feel like she sacrifices storytelling for spots, and that's why I just have not been able to get into her matches lately.
Well, not just that, but she really sacrifices wrestling to play the woe is me babyface, which that's not ever been Tessa Blanchard in any other match we've ever seen her against. But now that she's against men, she's now that Rey Mysterio babyface.
And it does not help that every one of her matches she's had, at least since winning the championship, has been, well, no, I would say against almost every match she's had against a man has been the guys taking advantage of her and treating her like a woman because she's a woman.
And disrespecting her.
And treating her as if she's like a little kid or something.
Acting like she's not on their level, kind of like you're wrestling with dad type of thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
I've seen that too. I'm on the same page as you on that.
Yeah. So I mean, I really think that she really needs to lose that championship. She works a lot better as a challenger than as a champion, and I think if they're going to keep this intergender stuff going on, they need to, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, tell the guys to stop treating her so derisively when they're in there with her.
They need to do like they did with Taya and Sexy Star and people like that in Lucha Underground, where they didn't make it a big deal, where you could have a female versus a female match here and there. You could, but then you have them in trios matches. You have them in, every now and then up against a man, but not making it the spotlight of your entire organization.
Yeah, I think the other thing I despise about Tessa Blanchard being the world champion is I feel like everything after she lost to Sami Callihan completely destroyed Sami Callihan's character.
Yep. And not only it kind of breaks my heart a little bit because we're in the same boat with Impact, or at least I am, in the same boat with Impact that I was with MLW last year. They were on such a run, such great storytelling, such great wrestling. Everything was going just fantastic. And then all of a sudden the wheels fell off. With MLW, it was when Sami Callihan got fired and then Jim Cornette quit. And the wheels fell off, and now all of a sudden they can't tell a story to save their lives. I feel like that same thing's going on with Impact. They had such great storytelling, such great performances and in-ring things and character development, and then all of a sudden Tessa won the title, and now it seems like they cannot tell a story for shit. Unless it involves the Rascals.
They're still telling some strong stories, but there's also a lot of the company that also feels very stagnant right now. I feel like the tag title scene is stagnant. I feel like the world title scene is. And Eddie and Michael have been doing a fantastic job. Eddie Edwards and Big Mike have done a great job in their storytelling.
Right.
The stuff with Sue Young um and
Havoc.
Jessica Havoc has been great. The stuff with Taya Valkyrie and Rosemary has been great. The stuff with the Deaners has been great. But there's just some stuff that just feels like um so like it's not going anywhere. I'm just trying to use something besides stagnant. It just feels like it's not going anywhere. So I'm not going to say that I'm in the same boat with them as with MLW, but definitely they're not as hot for me as they were a few months ago.
Well, with MLW, it's kind of the same thing. It's a lack of talent. With MLW, after Teddy Hart quit.
It's not lack of talent. It's choosing to focus on the wrong talent, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, is they do put a lot of focus on the ECW originals when they've got some really, really talented young guys that should be getting a whole hell of a lot. I wouldn't have an issue with Michael Elgin, Eddie Edwards, excuse me, Ace Austin, and OVE kind of being the focal point of the show. But they seem like they've all kind of taken a back seat for Rob Van Dam and people like that.
And the other guy, the other guy, it's easy to forget about because they do that same thing with him. But is an incredibly talented performer that should be better than should be bigger than he is, and should be in that mix as Moose.
Yeah.
He spent the last year and a half either proving he's the best two-story athlete, or that the TNA originals don't exist, or this and that, when really he should be up there in the main event.
Yeah, that's true. That is really true, and it's at this point they're not. They spent their time building him up to that level when he was in with Ace Austin Aries and Eddie Edwards.
Yep.
So he doesn't need to continually be built into that upper main event level. He's there.
Yeah, and the longer they keep, that's another thing about that I think feels so stagnant, is like Moose does not elevate ever. So.
No, he really doesn't.
And I'd be perfectly fine with a main event that included guys like Rhino and Ken Shamrock, but they can't be like the focal point. It should be Moose, Sami Callihan,
Eddie and Michael.
Eddie, Michael, and then eventually it should be Madman Fulton in there too, and Jake Christ. So.
And I wouldn't mind at someday having a guy like Ace Austin up there either, but I think he's got to work a lot more for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think that's the problem, is that they do these. The really sad thing is that they do what you and I have wanted for years for WWE to do, which is go back to that 4 pay-per-view format.
Right.
So you're building to each of these, but the problem is that it feels like they don't build to these shows to make them big moments. They just keep things going exactly the way it was.
Well, part of it's because they have 4 pay-per-views, yes, but they also have monthly specials. So technically, they still have their 12 pay-per-view format. They're just not calling them pay-per-views.
Right, but those could be used as ways to build towards the big 4 pay-per-views, and they're just not.
True, that's true.
So.
That is true.
Those could be used much like WWF used to use the Saturday Night's main events.
Well, we do have a little more time here.
We do?
Yeah, we got like 10 minutes.
All right.
And I had, we talked about possibly doing the Mount Rushmore of Wrestling. I have, with the time we have, I have a proposal.
I'm not marrying you.
Fuck. All right, well, how about we do, since you're not going to marry me, how about we do this, do one Mount Rushmore that's just the greatest of all time. Plain simple, greatest of all time. And then we kind of break away from there and maybe go with like a manager Mount Rushmore, a decades Mount Rushmore, like you can pick only one guy from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s,
maybe
a tag team Mount Rushmore or something like that.
What, like every episode?
No, just now. I mean, I can't imagine us. We're going to have a lot of agreement here, so it's not like we're going to be spending an hour on each one.
You want me to think of all this on top of my head?
How can you not? You don't know who your 4 greatest tag teams of all time are.
All right.
And that's kind of what makes this a little more fun too, is because we're doing this on the spot. It's not like we sat and prepared this big long bit and we're going to argue here and we're going to do this. You know, it's just who's your 4 greatest, your Mount Rushmore of all time.
All right, so you're gonna kill me for this because I thought about this a little bit more over the weekend. And I was like, I cannot fucking have Ric Flair in my top 4, never, ever. So it's because I wouldn't be basing it on what I watched. I'd be basing it on what other wrestlers say about him, because I never really, I have not, if I'm honest with myself in my heart of hearts, he was never really great to me. So for me,
and a lot of that's because you missed his major prime. I'm going to say this straight up: his prime was the early '80s in NWA.
But still, yeah, and that's possibly true. But like what I saw was basically the same match over and over and over again, sometimes taking way too long.
So a lot of it was, you know, I mean, it goes more into that, where for me the reason why he's still, you know, probably one of the, you know, he's on my Mount Rushmore is because I saw him every single week for 5.5 years in the early '80s. Late '70s, early '80s, and he was such a draw. He was the main reason I was watching wrestling. You know, so for me, it's a whole different feeling than it would be for you because you didn't watch him to the extent I did. So I get it. I definitely get it.
I wish I could have 5 on there, because if I did, there'd be a guy I definitely would want to put in there. But being that, you know, Mount Rushmore's only 4 people, so Hulk Hogan's got to be there. And I realized that Hogan also had a lot of matches that were exactly the same carbon copy. The difference between him, I think, is that he was responsible for the 2 biggest booms in the history of professional wrestling. Mm-hmm. Number 2, I'm going to put in there Hiroshi Tanahashi. Tanahashi is, to me, the greatest performer in Japanese pro wrestling history. He saved NJPW from a disaster caused by Antonio Inoki's terrible business dealings, and Inoki would be on a lot of people's lists, I think, in that same spot as Tanahashi is, but for me, Inoki was pretty boring as a performer. Chris Jericho is on there. I think Chris Jericho, you know, we've talked about it on here, is the greatest. I think he's the greatest of all time. He has defined so many eras to me. He always has a different character for when he enters a promotion or comes back to a promotion, and I just think that he does so many things so well. He's just amazing. And the 4th for me is Terry Funk. He's not an obvious choice, but we've talked before that I think Terry Funk is the ultimate pro wrestler. He is doing everything he can to win a match, and I think if it wasn't for Terry Funk, ECW would never have existed. If it wasn't for ECW, there never would have been a Ring of Honor. And if there wasn't for ECW, like I think that a lot of the wrestling that we see today would not be what we're seeing today. So those are my 4.
And I can't disagree with any of those. But I think because this is a personal greatest of all time, there's certain things that I look at a little differently. Like for me, I'm going more with the people that entertained me and the people that I felt were the greatest, maybe a little bit underrated, but in my mind they were great. Like it's hard for me to argue against Hulk Hogan just for what he's meant to this business. He is by far the most important person in wrestling outside of Vince McMahon ever. But he doesn't make my top 4 because these are people that for me have meant something more than that. Like Ric Flair is on mine because he if it wasn't for Ric Flair, I don't know that I'd be a wrestling fan. You know, I look at everything he did, and yeah, the AWA got me into it, and you know the Midnight Rockers and all that stuff. But it was ultimately Ric Flair and the Horsemen and everything they did in the early '80s. That's why I'm a wrestling fan. Randy Savage.
Can I just interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I understand that Ric Flair is why you're a wrestling fan, but also we've talked about how special WrestleMania 3 was to your...
Yep, and that's where I was getting next.
Okay, go ahead.
Randy Savage is my number 2 guy.
He was Hogan's bitch. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I know, and I understand that, he never really got to the heights that he probably should have because of a guy like Hulk Hogan. But ultimately, when you watch the WWF from, say, WrestleMania 3 until 1991, who was the workhorse? Who was the guy that was there entertaining week in and week out? Well, Hogan was off, doing movies and showing up every fourth pay-per-view, maybe showing up on a Saturday night's main event. Randy Savage was on every single Superstars putting on a match of the year contender. And then you parlayed that into their WCW run, and I felt like at a lot of times Savage was the more compelling character even when the NWO started up. So it's for me, Savage is my number two, is my second one on there. And then we talked.
I think personally that Randy Savage was a fantastic performer. He had maybe the greatest mind in the history of the business as far as putting together matches.
And
And one of the things that I lament is that we never got to see a proper match between Randy Savage in his prime and Shawn Michaels in his prime.
oh, that would have been
Um,
amazing.
but then and again, I think we got a version of that in the amazing career feud that Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins had against each other. So,
Yeah, yeah, and for me, I mean, Savage was such a he might be, and he gets a lot of credit for his mic work, but he could be one of the most underrated mic guys of all time.
yeah.
His interviews were just fascinating, every single one of them. We talk about Jake Roberts and how good he was at talking quietly, and then we talk about Hogan and how good he was at yelling. Savage did both of it.
Hmm.
And he kept you on the edge of your seat in every promo he did. His matches were just works of art, even back in the 1983, 84. Everything about Savage to me just, and that it was a tough decision because of what Hogan has meant to the business, but ultimately I have to go Savage. Um, Obviously Jericho, we've talked about that so many times. Jericho is easily the greatest of all time in my mind right now. And then my fourth is still AJ Styles. AJ Styles, I was singing his praises back in '02 as a future best in the world, and he proved that, and he continues to prove that. I mean, even at his advanced age, I've seen him put on some just amazing matches with Daniel Bryan and Mustafa Ali and things like that. So if I had to pick my personal top four, it's those four.
Yeah, and if I was going for my top four favorite, top four like best wrestlers of all time, AJ would be right there up there with Jericho. But that's just not the way I did my list.
Right.
So you know, so I mean,
So
I can't argue. I can't argue strenuously against any of those guys on there. I think it's amazing not to have Hogan on there. I think it's kind of amazing that neither one of us had Steve Austin on there. But you
well,
know, it is what it is, I
and
guess.
see
So
that's kind of where I was going next. With the generational one. The '80s. If we're gonna look at this legitimately, and let's do. I'll give an '80s, you give an '80s. I'll give the '90s, you give the '90s. So and back and forth. But I mean, if we're gonna go generational, and with this one, I'm looking more at who was the most important to the business at the time, and also was a top draw, was a great performer, and blah blah blah. If I'm gonna pick an '80s generational '80s wrestler, I have to go Hogan. Ahead of Flair, ahead of Savage. I felt like Hogan had a more complete decade. He was responsible for, the '80s. If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, wrestling would not have become popular in the '80s. Plain and simple, no matter what anybody else was doing.
so what are we doing? Are we going back and forth?
If you want to, or I can just run down mine. I figured it'd be a little more fun if we go back and forth because I think the '90s are going to be a little rough.
Okay, well, if we're gonna go back and forth, let's just say that neither one of us can pick somebody the other guy already picked.
You think so? I don't think we have to do that. I mean,
All right, well then I was gonna say, okay, I agree with Hogan then. Now
it's
it's your
it's hard. It's hard not to. With the '80s, there's no dispute. Honestly, it's very hard to dispute the '80s. I mean, you could make a case for Flair, but Flair was really at his best in the early part of the '80s. By the end of the '80s, he was not as good. Savage really didn't hit his stride till about '88, um, arguably. So while Savage and Flair are two of my greatest of all time and definitely on my Mount Rushmore, they don't make my Mount Rushmore for the 80s because that was Hogan's era. Plain and simple. It's hard to dispute that with anybody.
But don't you think well, maybe you don't, but I think two of Ric Flair's best years were in the 80s, like 83 and 89.
Right, but
Or,
did he run from 84 to 88 with the championship? Did he completely revolutionize wrestling? Did he have cartoons and bring literally people to the stands the way Hogan did?
no. And that's why I think you also have to include Roddy Piper in there.
Yeah,
Because to me, there is no Hogan without Piper.
No, but Hogan or Piper was pretty much out of Hogan's life by like '86.
And are we limiting this to professional wrestlers? Because to me, actually, the Bobby Heenan family.
Oh, we're getting there. I mean, that was another one I wanted to do was like possibly a faction of all time, manager of all time, that type of thing.
Yeah, but I think the Bobby Heenan family and Hulk Hogan are so inexplicably tied throughout the 80s. That was what fueled Hogan's drive was feuds against King Kong Bundy and Andre the Giant and Hercules Hernandez, and you know what I mean, Mr.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and if it wasn't for Piper and it wasn't for great heels make the face, if it wasn't for Piper, if it wasn't for Heenan family, would Hogan have been as popular? Probably not.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing is like So who else is on your 80s list? Because I'm curious.
My 80s list? That was it. I was just gonna do one from the 80s.
Just Hogan?
Yep. Just this is a decade.
Oh, okay. I see what we're seeing. Okay, I see what we're doing now. Okay. I'm gonna go Sting.
God, that's hard to dispute.
I realize that he really only started like in '87, but I think he was part of getting the country's attention a little bit on the NWA/WCW in the late '80s. So.
Yeah, that's a hard one to dispute. Jumping to the '90s, this is where I run into an issue because there's so many that deserve it, but I don't think anybody deserves it more than Shawn Michaels. I mean, Shawn Michaels, yeah, maybe his run at the top wasn't as prosperous, but when you look back at what Shawn Michaels did, Shawn Michaels ushered out the old guys. He kind of broke apart the next generation while leading it, or the new generation era while leading it in the cartoon era, and then he and Triple H almost single-handedly brought in the Attitude Era with DX. Not to mention all of the five-star classics he had throughout the time. And that was a tough one because I really wanted to give it to Austin, but I think Shawn Michaels meant more to the '90s than Austin did.
He might have meant more to the '90s than Austin did, but I don't. I think if it wasn't for Steve Austin, the WWE might not even exist anymore. And honestly, my favorite, maybe my favorite feud of all time, or my favorite rivalry of all time, is Steve Austin versus Dustin Rhodes, and that all took place in the '90s in WCW. It took place like from 1992 all the way through 1995. That was an amazing time where both guys built each other up so well. And I loved that character of Stunning Steve Austin and all the iterations of him. And then he goes to ECW and he just, evolves into the Stone Cold type character and then rolls into the WWF where he just starts building and building and building and I don't think that if Steve Austin hadn't emerged when he did, that the WWE would even still be around right now. So I think that if you're talking about the '90s, that Steve Austin is the guy.
See, and that was one that I really because unfortunately, I'm saying we're doing this off the cuff, but I've actually been working on this for months in my own head, and I did really go back and forth about Michaels and Austin. to me, it came down to really the fact that Austin was amazing in WCW. He was amazing in his run as the ringmaster. When he started out in his Austin gimmick, the Stone Cold gimmick, stuff like him sitting on the ring post staring at his watch, things like that was just phenomenal and stuff that you'll never see again. But when it ultimately came down to me, for me, was the impact that a guy like Shawn Michaels had, not just even though he was partially responsible for the crap that happened in the early 90s. He also had so many great moments up until, including just industry changing moments. As much as I want, I'll give Goldust credit where credit's due. He was really the first character of the Attitude Era. But ultimately, if it wasn't for DX, I don't know that the Attitude Era would have taken off the way that it did. He was part of the Montreal Screwjob. He was a dick backstage, but he put on amazing matches. He ran some great storylines, and that's ultimately why I chose him over Austin. I think Austin.
Shawn Michaels founded DX along with Triple H, but it wasn't the Shawn Michaels version of DX that took off the way that it did. I mean, people get this wrong, and it's ridiculous to me that Shawn Michaels was, is considered to be that big of a part of DX. And it was ridiculous to me that Shawn Michaels and Triple H themselves combined to reform DX so many times, because the DX that really took off, the D-Generation X that I remember, is the team involving led by Triple H, where the night after Shawn Michaels pimped off with his back injury, Triple H took the ball and ran with it, like he said, and brought in the New Age Outlaws and brought in X-Pac to join him in China. And that 5-person team is, to me, D-Generation X.
And while I'm agreeing with you to some point, some of the stuff that Triple H and Shawn did by themselves is unheard of at the time. A lot of the little skits and things that DX did, that they didn't have as many little outstanding funny moments. They had the two that I can think of off the top of my head when they mocked the Nation of Domination and their invasion of WCW. Outside of that, it was just their antics. Their ring work, their matches and their promos, small promos.
Oh my God, matches like really in a wrestling conversation?
Which didn't really happen during the 90s. I mean, the majority of the matches were a minute and a half long. But to not look at what the stuff that Triple H and Shawn did right after they turned heel and formed DX, their feud with Sergeant Slaughter, wearing the masks with the little wipers on them, their State of the Union address where they used basically every swear word in the book, but showed us how
that was
great.
funny and it was great, but I mean, it was like over like a 4 or 5 month span. It did not define the 90s the way that Steve Austin did.
I'm not saying it defined it. I'm saying that it ushered it.
And I don't know, man. I mean, to me, Steve Austin was the guy in the 90s, and I don't think that Shawn Michaels would even be in the conversation for me. To me, I mean, if you're not going to talk about Steve Austin, you've got to talk about The Rock, you got to talk about Mankind, Hogan, Benoit, Jericho. I mean, to me, those guys define the 90s a lot more and are bigger stars in the 90s than Shawn Michaels is. Shawn Michaels had a great 4 or 5 year run where he was in that span. I totally agree with that, but to me, he wasn't the megastar that that those other guys were in the 90s.
And see, that's why I downplay The Rock. As great as The Rock is, The Rock was kind of a one-trick pony who really only had a 4-year run on top where he was really that big of a draw before he started to kind of tail off and ran off to Hollywood.
Yes, but 2 of those were in the 90s.
Right.
So we're talking about the 90s.
But I'm just saying.
If you're talking about all time, yeah, I totally agree with you. But we're not talking about all time.
And see, for me, that's why
even the Undertaker was way more a guy in the 90s than Shawn Michaels was.
See, and I'm probably giving him a lot more credit because I was entertained. He was really the only thing that was entertaining me, especially when Hart was gone on his hiatus, and then I don't feel like if it was for Shawn Michaels that Bret Hart would have ever turned heel and formed one of the greatest heel factions of all time, and had one of the better heel runs of all time in '97 like he did. So I might be giving Shawn Michaels a little more credit, but then again, too, this is and I might not be looking at it from an industry standard like I did with Hogan in the '80s, but for me, Shawn Michaels was a wrestler of the '90s.
Yeah, and you're way off base. I'm sorry, but you are.
Then you're really going to
Because
beat my 2000s pick.
because he wasn't even around when the crucial time was happening, when it was time for when really the nitty gritty was happening. He wasn't even there when the company finally turned it around.
No, but I think his antics helped usher it in.
Sure. Who's your 2000s pick? Oh wait, I gotta give my 90s pick, Austin.
Yeah,
I give the right pick at the 90s. So go ahead. Who's your pick for 2000s?
it's got to be Cena. I don't know a more polarizing character in the 2000s than Cena. Somebody that would sell out houses, somebody that kind of kept the wrestling world talking, and he was, to me, was basically the Hogan of the 2000s.
He was the Hogan of the 2000s, but I can't stand the motherfucker. So.
No, I get it.
So I mean, there was so many times that 2002 to 2004, I was really a big Cena fan, even into 2005. But the way that they turned his character, to me, was a betrayal to all of his fans, and so for that reason, and the fact that he's never gone back to being the guy that he was built up, that we as fans built him up as something else. We cheered for a guy that they decided to change as soon as he made it to the top, and that to me is unforgivable. For me, the guy in the 2000s, the guy that kept me loving pro wrestling, the guy that made me want to tune in every single week, no matter what was going on, is a guy you mentioned at the top of this discussion, and that's AJ Styles.
Yeah.
In the 2000s, the guy that to me was professional wrestling was AJ Styles.
Yeah, and that was another hard one for me because I really wanted to go with my heart and pick AJ Styles. But ultimately, I kind of picked the guy that I felt like was the best for the business at the time. And unfortunately, as much as I hate it, I'd much rather say Randy Orton. I'd much rather say Edge. I'd much rather say AJ Styles. Hell, I'd even rather say Jeff Jarrett. But ultimately, I felt like the guy who was best for the business during the 2000s was Cena.
And I will not dispute that he was the best for the business in the 2000s, but I will say that the business practices that they used with him in the 2000s led to them not having any superstars now in the 2010s, not in the 2010s, in the 2020s.
Not having any major next level generational type stars. Yes, I agree.
Exactly. Yeah, they kept Cena strong, way too strong for way too long.
What really ruined them was keeping him strong up until 2018.
Yeah, I mean they really. There's nobody really that got the rub from John Cena and became a major superstar. Daniel Bryan was the closest, and Daniel Bryan and CM Punk were the closest, but
they were both super.
But CM Punk was shot down by the company when he should have been riding at the top as the biggest star, and then Daniel Bryan got injured right after that storyline completed.
But they were also major they were also arguably major superstars before John Cena.
Not to the level that they should have been by beating John Cena.
I will agree with you that nobody outside of maybe Kevin Owens and possibly AJ Styles benefited from a feud with John Cena.
AJ, I'll give you. Kevin Owens, I won't. I think if Owens had beaten Cena in match number 2, then we could talk about that. But considering that he only beat Cena that one time, I don't think that's true.
See, for me, with him beating him in his debut match and then turning on him and going on that epic heel run, I think that made Kevin Owens a star. I think they really didn't capitalize on it, but I think that all the wheels were in motion for Kevin Owens to be a mega star. And they just, because of his look, Vince kind of poo-pooed him, so he never really got the rub he should have. But I think all the wheels were set in motion for him too. And I can't say that about anybody else.
Okay, so now we're into the 2010s. So who you got there?
This is a rough one, a really, really rough one for me. Because my heart wants to go with AJ. I think AJ really came into his own about 2009, 2010. He really started to develop into this otherworldly performer. And then his jaunt in Ring of Honor, his run to Japan, and then in WWE, it's hard to dispute what he was to this business. But ultimately, if I'm going to say who was best for this business in the 2010s, Kazuchika Okada.
There you go. You got to the right place. Go ahead.
I don't know anybody. You talked about Yoshi Tanahashi kind of saving New Japan from what Inoki did. But ultimately, Okada took what Tanahashi did, and took it to so many new levels that it's now easily the second best promotion on the planet. He's in there night in, night out, giving amazing performances. There's not much I can say wrong about Kazuchika Okada in the last decade.
That is absolutely the right answer for the 2010s. Kazuchika Okada took that ball that he was given by Hiroshi Tanahashi after years of struggling to overcome him in what was a great storyline and great decisions, and eventually just ran with it to the point where he is the most consistent wrestling performer on the planet. And as much as in the last couple of years, I've been like, or actually last year, really last year that they went back to that well too early. The fact is that Kazuchika Okada was the wrestler of the 2010s.
Yep.
And his performance at the top of that promotion led them to being a national promotion. I mean, along with help by guys like Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, of course, but and Tanahashi himself. But I mean, really, without the contributions of Hiroshi Tanahashi and then building on Tanahashi into Okada, New Japan Pro Wrestling is not in the spot where where it's an international promotion the way that it has become.
Exactly, and a lot of that was a very hard one for me because I really felt like AJ was on top of his game and probably the best wrestler in the world from 2012 to 2018. But ultimately, I felt like Okada did more for the wrestling business than AJ did. Another guy that I strongly considered.
I think those, and I'm sorry, John. I just want to say I think those are the right two guys. I really think that Okada and AJ are not worthy two wrestlers on the planet in that time frame, but also are the two right guys to be considering in the top in the 2010s.
The only other guy that I even slightly considered in the 2010s was CM Punk. Because I felt like he put, after, I want to say like 2009, 2010, the horrible way that Hogan and Bischoff and Dixie Carter destroyed TNA. And just, we finally had that somewhat decent competitor, Ring of Honor. They had some momentum, a lot of it because of CM Punk in the 2010s, but they still weren't really on the docket. And New Japan, was really kind of under the radar around the time when CM Punk made his run. But ultimately, I feel like CM Punk did a lot to put the spotlight on wrestling. It was just mishandled so badly. But he was the only other guy that I even thought about in that situation.
Yeah, like you said, he was mishandled so badly. He also only wrestled for the first 3 years of that decade.
I thought it was longer than that, because wasn't the Daniel Bryan stuff in 2015? Or was it
Nope,
14?
2014. So and I go by decades by the actual mathematics of the decade. So 2011, 2012, 2013, and then he left right after the Royal Rumble in 2014. So I mean, really, he only had 3 years in that decade.
Yeah. But he's the only other
Yeah.
guy in this decade that I would have even considered. I mean, ultimately, it came down to AJ and Okada, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, a guy that really the decade could have been about, got injured at the very beginning of the decade, and that's Edge.
Yep.
So
Yeah, I think Edge. Honestly, I think if Edge was still wrestling in the ring, well, I mean, he's back now, but if he had stuck around, I would be just as sick of him as I am of the other Attitude Era '90s guys, which is really sad to say.
you know, um, I hate bringing this guy up, I really do, but if you're talking about the WWF, probably the wrestler of the decade has got to be considered to be Brock Lesnar.
The 2010s? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because as much as I don't like the style that he's developed, because it's just become so de regard these days. But really, I mean, he's been the focal point in the WWE since 2013, 2012 even. So
Yeah, yeah, he really has. I mean, since he's come back, he's been the top draw. And like you said, as much as you like to say, there's really not been anybody that's been above him, even Cena.
yeah, even Cena, Reigns, Rollins doesn't, Daniel Bryan doesn't matter. It's Brock Lesnar has been, he basically controlled one or both of those championships over the last 7 years.
Well, this whole discussion turned into a lot more than I thought it was going to. I figured we'd run through like 6, 7 of these in 10 minutes. So I don't know if you
You don't
want
know us very well.
right. I don't know if you want. I mean, we could certainly continue this. I'm way more than happy talking about this, or we could table some of these other ones. Maybe bring a couple of them back next week or something like that.
Yeah, they wish table because we still have another show to do.
That is true. So, guys, you're hopefully listening to us on YouTube or Lords of Pain Radio, but if you are on YouTube, be sure to hit that like button, ring the notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and help us out any way you can. Also, our patreon.com/Kingdom of Honor. All of our archives are on there, and all of the stuff, in fact, what we're about to do here in a couple seconds, is a Patreon exclusive show where we're going to break down it's Death Before Dishonor 2011 from Ring of Honor, and that brings us to a whole nother discussion on Wrestler of the Year. So be sure to check that out. That'll be on patreon.com/Kingdom of Honor. Probably not tonight. I'll probably get to it tomorrow after I'm done with work before our Dynamite show. But that'll definitely be on this week. And, of course, Twitter. I'm at Regi Co-op. He is at ZanmanLLP. Use hashtag KOH and hashtag DAD to follow us everywhere on there.
And make sure you stay tuned to the other LOP radio shows. We'll be back with you tomorrow night with Dynamite After Dark, right after AEW Dynamite goes off the air. On Thursday, Imp will be here with his Imp's LOP Radio Adventure. On Friday, the guys are back with WWF The Legacy Series. I just listened over the last couple of days to their show on WrestleMania 3. Downright spectacular. Those guys do an awesome job. And then we'll be back with you next week with Kingdom of Honor, talking about the second night of Rebellion.
And probably more Mount Rushmore talk, because, to be honest, I'm enjoying this shit.
Yeah, me too. That's all we've got. We'll try to do better next time. This is Shane saying long days, pleasant nights, and Jeff saying
goodbye.